In 1935, the remains of a Viking ship burial were discovered at Ladby, right next to Kerteminde Fjord in Denmark. This was not an ordinary ship, but a warship of almost 22 meters in length and 3 meters in width, with room for 32 oarsmen. Just like the burial mound at Skjalden and many other places, the burial mound at Ladby had also been destroyed by plowing long ago. The majority of the Viking ship had also decayed, but there were still bits and pieces of wood left, so we know that it was made of oak and that it was built around 925. Because of its condition, the ship was left at the location, and only the most valuable objects were removed from the grave. But a new burial mound was built around it, and the ship was once again encapsulated in order to preserve it. I find it remarkable that somehow the shape of the Ladby ship is still visible after 1100 years, and I was filled with all kinds of emotions while being in its presence. But it is kind of hard to explain how it feels to be inside a dark tomb right next to the remains of an ancient ship. It was not completely silent, but it felt like the world was set on pause for a few moments, and I only wish that I could have shared the experience with someone. The skeletons of the 11 horses and 4 dogs that accompanied the deceased into the afterlife are still laying in the same spot where they were sacrificed. There's also something truly unique that we don't really get to see from these graves, and that is this big anchor. This anchor is made of iron, and it has an iron chain that is approximately 15.5 meters. And it looks to be in such good condition that it could probably be used today if we wanted to. Most Viking ships had of course also an ornament in front of the ship, and in this case it is believed that it was some kind of dragon head. The dragon head was decorated with iron curls, but the ones inside the tomb are just the replicas. The originals are being preserved inside the museum, along with the spikes from the dragon tail. The horses in the grave are the same kind as what we today would call Icelandic horses. These small horses have a natural resilience to harsh weather conditions, which is probably why they thrive so well in the Icelandic climate. The 4 dogs were very different from each other. 2 of them would have looked a bit like sled dogs from Greenland. The third was a lot bigger, perhaps a Broholmer, or a race very closely related to it. The 4th dog was the smallest of them all, and it can best be described as a fox terrier. They are all hunting dogs, but having 3 different kinds of dogs is probably an indication that this person loved dogs. The dogs were buried with a unique dog leash made of leather with ornaments in bronze. These ornaments were also part of dating their burial, because these patterns were part of the hottest fashion during the 920s to 940s. Something that makes this dog leash very unique is that the king could have controlled all of the dogs at the same time, and perhaps he even used the leash when he was out and walking his dogs in the nearby area. At least that is what I imagined when I was there. The researchers are quite certain that this is how the Ladby ship looked like, but many of the details are qualified guesses based on previous findings. This is, of course, a replica, and it was built by using the same kind of tools and techniques as they did in the Viking Age. As you already may know, the Vikings loved colors, and we know that the colors of this ship were blue and yellow, and perhaps that was the colors that the clan was using. We know without a doubt that the Viking ships had colors, and there have been found plenty of examples of this from excavations. The Viking ships are also portrayed as being colorful on the Bayeux tapestry, so we are quite certain that they were colorful, and they did definitely not look as they have been portrayed on the History Channel. But one of the questions that have haunted the archaeologists for centuries is, who was this person? Of course, there was no question about the status of the individual, because only the rich and powerful kings and queens could afford a lavish burial like this. And as mentioned before, the archaeologists had come to the conclusion that this burial must have taken place around 925. And this is actually an interesting time in history, because that was only about 30 to 40 years before the famous Harald Bluetooth united Denmark and Norway into one kingdom. The mount itself is also located at an interesting place, and it was probably no coincidence why this exact spot was chosen. The mount is located right next to Kerteminde Fjord, which is connected to the Great Belt, from where merchants could arrive with their goods and sell them at the local market. But there's a problem with that theory. Ladby is not known for being a trade town, nor has there been found anything that could look like a market in the area. So what could have been so special about this place? One of the theories is that the king made a fortune by providing a safe harbor for the travelers. They could either have come to rest for the night or wait for a storm to pass. It is also possible that the merchants could seek refuge if they were pursued by hostile ships. It would have been easy for the king and his men to defend against a fleet of ships. Not only is the entrance to the fjord very narrow, but there would also have been a maze of wooden beams submerged in the water. So even if hostile ships were to defeat his men at the entrance to the fjord, they would have had a hard time advancing if they didn't know where the beams were located. And even if they somehow knew where it was safe to sail, they would still have to sail in a predetermined route, which made it easy to defend. This would also have significantly slowed down the ships that were approaching, which would have given the king and his men enough time to react to the unwanted guests. So unless the visitors were friendly and paid their passage, they would have a hard time sailing into the fjord. But just because you sail into an inlet does not mean that the hostile ships will disappear. They could still have waited along the coast for them to return, but the king could have offered them an additional service to the traveling merchants, because further inland is the village Dræby. The word Dræby means the place to go, in Danish, stedet hvor man drager, and this name could have been an indication that many people came here. The locals could have made a living by emptying out the stones of the ships and dragging them 800 meters across the land until they reached Odense Fjord on the other side. Once the ship was safely in the water again, they could have filled the ships with the same amount of stones again, which would already have been stored there. You may not know this, but many of these ships use stones to prevent them from tipping on their side. So unless you were traveling with a lot of goods, there would always be a few tons of stones on the bottom of the ship. The king would probably have had a few warships in Odense Fjord, and it is possible that they accompanied the merchants out to the open sea to make sure that it was safe to travel to one of the trade towns such as Aros in Jutland. Dræby could also have been a trade town, or have had some kind of importance due to its name, but there has not been found anything to suggest this, at least not so far. The king at Ladby could also have earned his riches with the sword, and he could have had close ties with the king at Tissø, an old village that is located across the Great Belt on the island of Skjalden. It is possible that these two clans raided together in foreign lands, or perhaps they were just a defensive alliance against hostile invaders. But it was probably these two clans who controlled the great belt between Funen and Sealand. Regardless of whether he was a warmonger or if he earned his fortune by providing a safe harbor, his funeral would probably have looked spectacular, and anyone who had a high social status would probably have been invited and expected to bring expensive gifts. But the burial mound would not stand untouched for long. There are signs that someone already robbed the grave within 1 or 2 generations. Not only did they take everything of value, but they also removed the remains of the king. Why exactly his remains were removed is only something that the gods know. But we have 2 theories of what might have happened. One theory is that it was his own family who opened the grave and removed his remains so he could be buried at a local church. This would make perfect sense because the Christianization of Denmark took place during the reign of King Harald Bluetooth, and therefore his family would probably have wanted him to be moved to their family grave at their church. Another theory is that it was the rise of the Jelling dynasty that resulted in his grave being plundered. If this was done in order to help Harald with funding his fortresses across Denmark, or perhaps because he wanted to erase the Ladby king from history, is only something that we can speculate about today. But the evidence does seem to suggest that it was the second theory that could be what most likely happened, because the grave was not just robbed, it was split apart, and many of the items were smashed to pieces. This is not an action of someone who is just there to steal the riches from the dead, but of someone who either had a hatred towards him or wanted to erase the history of the previous rulers in the area. Erasing the past of another clan or society is a strategy that has been used many times before, and it is a strategy that is still being used in some parts of the world today. I can think of a few examples, but I'm not gonna be too political. The Viking Museum at Ladby is an interesting place, and if you one day come to Denmark, then I would like to recommend this place. It is not the biggest museum in the world, but you can spend a couple of hours here. I loved seeing the ship and the many objects, but it was very interesting to see the dog leash. It is not something that you really think about, so it is nice to see everyday items like these. I would also like to highlight the tapestry that was made by a group of local women who tried to capture the history of Ladby, inspired by and by following the exact technique as the famous Bayeux tapestry from 1070s. I know it's been some time since I uploaded a video, but I'm still here, and if you watched the video, I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, and if you are not, please remember to subscribe. I just want to say one last thing before I end this video for today. Just look at these 3 people. They have been members for all this time. That is incredible. Thank you. See you next time for another video. Thank you for watching.